Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Melinda Weekes-Laidlow, and I'm a facilitator and also the lead cultivator and CEO of Beautiful Ventures, a narrative change social enterprise. It's my delight to be a moderator for this particular panel, where the title of it is around a conversation about accountability and communication. And our panelists and conversants will be two members of the board and the executive director of the International Documentary Association. So, without further ado, I'm going to kick it to our two board members to start us off. And then you can kick it then to Rick to bring it from there. So, Grace Lee and Chris Perez, please start us in this conversation. After all of the conversants, we'll have some time for conversation, Q&A, and the like.
Thanks so much. Can you guys hear me? Thank you. Thanks so much, Melinda. Very happy to be here. I'm seeing all the great energy at the IDA Hub in general is just really inspiring, and really looking forward to the in-person day tomorrow. My name is Chris Bettis. I have brown hair, white shirt, olive skin. I'm co-president of the board with Grace Lee. And, when we were planning for this panel, I think we initially thought, okay, well, I'll say something for 10 minutes and then Grace will say something for 10 minutes. Rick will say, this is a conversation, right? And I think we took a step back and said, I think intros will be helpful in giving you a little bit of history about, who we are and what our relationship to the organization is. But we really want this to be a conversation. So I encourage as many questions as possible. And we're here for you guys. This is our conference. So with that, a little bit about me. I've been co-president of the board since March of this year, so a few months. Been on the board for about 4 years. And my day job is I'm a managing partner at Donaldson Callif Bettis, which is a transactional entertainment law firm based here in LA. We represent independent filmmakers, the vast majority of whom are documentary producers and directors. So for 15 years, this has been my home. I love working with doc filmmakers from, the idea stage all the way to distribution. In terms of my path here to the IDA, it really started about 15 years ago. I was a third year at law school. I was in an intellectual property clinic, and my professor at the time, Jack Lerner, was heavily involved with the IDA. And we started an advocacy effort on a pro bono basis, working with Michael Donaldson to appeal to the US Copyright Office to try to get an exemption for documentary filmmakers to be able to rely on fair use from the DMCA. We were successful at that. We got an exemption for filmmakers. And at that point in my life, it was probably the most satisfying professional experience of my life. And I knew that at that moment, it would be a dream to work with Michael Donaldson. And luckily, he offered me a job. And 15 years later, I'm still at the same firm. So for these last 15 years, the firm has been, working with the IDA on a pro bono basis, supporting lots of advocacy efforts. Fast forward 4 years ago, Jack Lerner, who was a former board member, recruited me to join the board. I was thrilled, was honored, and I really wanted to focus my efforts on the Advocacy Committee. So I eventually became the chair of the Advocacy Committee. And for those who don't know, it's a really broad category of things, but my focus was what is happening out in the world of law that the IDA can get behind and support that is helpful for documentary filmmakers. Fast forward to the beginning of this year, it came to a point where we needed a new president, and Grace and I decided to step up. We felt the need to lead this organization the best way that we could. So I promised I would keep it brief. That was not very brief, but I just I wanted to give you some background on my relationship with the IDA because it's very important to me. So Grace, do you want to?
Sure. Also, thank you everyone for attending this panel. I really appreciate it. And it's so nice to see so many of the IDA real fellows here coming in from all over the world. It truly feels like an international documentary association event. My name is Grace Lee, and I am an independent filmmaker. I make documentaries. I'm also I also occasionally make podcasts. I'm also the co-founder of ADOC, the Asian American Documentary Network, which has a connection to Getting Real. And I'm also, as Chris said, co-chair of the IDA board. Just briefly, my connection to IDA really started back in 2016. I've been making films for 20 years, but I actually didn't really have a deep connection with IDA, even though I've lived in Los Angeles, went to film school here, and I've been making documentaries for a while. And it was because, you know, I had heard about it, but it just didn't feel like a place that was welcoming to me. Or maybe I just didn't know enough people who were in like certain documentary circles. But in 2016, a group of Asian American people, the doc fields, mostly filmmakers, we started talking about, well, it's really important for us to sort of convene together and talk about like, how do we advance ourselves as Asian American filmmakers and support each other? And so we were looking at where could we do this? And we knew that Getting Real 2016 was coming up. And so we asked the programming director and, you know, and the ED was like, this might be a good place to do that. And so the IDA was so open and generous and sponsored our opportunity to have like 80 Asian American filmmakers come. And that was really the launch of what is now ADOC, which has now been 6 years. So it's really been, you know, Getting Real has really been an important part of ADOC's development, but also my career. And on top of that, I'm also a filmmaker. And so I've also had the privilege of being an enterprise grant awardee for a film that I made with Marjan Svinia 4 years ago. And on top of that, I'm also, I have my films fiscally sponsored by the IDA. So the IDA has really been like a critical part of my career as a documentary filmmaker. And that's why, you know, a couple years ago when I was asked to join the board, I'd never been on a board before. I said yes, because I've gotten so many opportunities through IDA, and I want to make sure that this pipeline continues to give other people opportunities, and also, you know, sort of all the things I believe and care about for this field. It just felt like an opportunity to really do that. So that's my not brief introduction. So thank you.
Wow. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today virtually, and for virtual guests. There are about 40 people in the audience at the community hub here at IDA, and I want to welcome the in-person guests here too. I'm Rick Bettis. I'm not related to Chris, though we share the same last name. I'm the executive director of IDA, and I've been in this position for about 15 months. For the visual description, I am a middle-aged, brown-skinned mestizo man with short gray hair, a light blue shirt, and a dark blue sports coat, and I'm wearing eyeglasses. So, you know, many of you have never had the chance to meet me, either in person, and certainly not since I started the job because of COVID. So I haven't had the chance to connect with a lot of you to explain why I took this job. But I took this job for many of the same reasons that were in the documentary field. Like you, I realize the power of nonfiction storytelling, and how documentary specifically could feed our soul, how it can help us understand people around us and the world around us, and how it helps us connect with other people. And it's not just the films, it's the practitioners, the makers, that you all have the special ability to connect with the people in your films and build these special relationships and connect with each other. You know, in this community hub yesterday, when I saw everyone come together and build new relationships or connect with people they hadn't seen in a while, it affirmed why I'm a part of this community, that warmth and that ability to want to build community. And those are the reasons I really took this job and wanted to embrace it and all the challenges that come with it. You know, I came to this job after working for about a decade as an independent filmmaker myself. And then that decade followed another decade working as a funder and a program designer and helping filmmakers make films. And in that period, I, you know, both phases of my work, I came face to face with the challenges that independent documentary filmmakers face, and especially the under-resourced ones. So when I had the chance to interview for the job and the board hired me, I saw it as an opportunity to try to bring to the field a type of reassessment and a revisiting and a reallocation of resources. You know, the IDA, our job is to support a vital documentary field, you know, cultivate documentary talent, but we're also in a new era. You know, about 3 years now, we became very aware of the disparities in our society, and those disparities are echoed in the documentary field. And I wanted to rise to that challenge to bring our people together to address them. You know, especially now, as we're becoming more aware of new documentary economies and new models of production, there are some critical questions about our field. Questions like who has final cut on a film that where the stakes of representations of communities are vital, where lived experiences are at stake, where historical events could be easily misinterpreted. There are questions around the budgets. When do budgets drive awards? When do budgets drive decisions around who should tell that story, what stories are told? And I want to ensure with all of us, how do we not replicate these or reinforce these systems or practices that have enabled, decades of inequity? I think that's where we are today. And I think that's why the IDA is important and why I care so much. And I think why my colleagues and you are here today. Now, I have to fully acknowledge that the IDA has faced some challenges this year and some struggles. I do affirm the right for all IDA staffers, the current staff and former staff, to be treated with dignity and respect. I recognize the importance of accountability. That's why we're having this conversation today. I've heard the concerns about IDA working conditions and the staff. The board, our senior leadership team, and we take these very seriously. As you know, IDA management, we voluntarily recognized the Documentary Workers United, the labor organization formed by IDA staffers as part of the Communications Workers of America. The union and IDA management, we began the process of negotiating a comprehensive collective bargaining agreement, or a CBA. IDA management has already participated in 2 contract negotiation sessions with a union representative and staff. And we set a regular schedule to meet and work through to get to a collective bargaining agreement. We appreciate the work that the IDA staff have done in submitting proposals to get to this collective bargaining agreement. We also offered a safe space for the Documentary Workers United members to meet here at Getting Real, a closed door space. Earlier today, they had their session where they can communicate directly with the community about where they are. It'll take, months, hopefully not too many months before we actually can reach and complete the first contract between IDA management and the Documentary Workers United. So knowing that it'll take a while, management has proposed a memo of understanding with the DWU and CWA, where we can implement some agreements now, and we don't have to wait until we get to the contract stage. That memo of understanding includes a discipline and discharge policy where no DWE member will be discharged without cause. Union members will have the right to union representation in any work-related or disciplinary-related meeting with IDA management. There's a grievance and arbitration provision to resolve any workplace disputes, again, long before we come up with the contract agreement. And we have assurances in this proposal that DWU members can talk openly about the union here at work through IDA work-related email addresses. In short, we want to embrace a pro-worker, pro-labor position between IDA and the DWU. That reflects our values, all of us here, and it's highly important to us, and we need to communicate that to you all here. You know, we're a 40-year organization. As I mentioned earlier, there's some big critical questions faced in our field, so our work is more important than ever. So it's vital that we stay in communication with you all to make sure that we are doing what we should to ensure the accountability of the organization, that we continue to cultivate a thriving documentary community. With that in mind, I want to engage in open one-on-one conversations with all of you all. So I am scheduling time for anybody who wants to sign up to talk to me. You just have to send an email to the following address, and I think we should be able to drop it in the chat. It's edofficehours@documentary.org, where anyone can sign up. Jonathan was laughing. That's the best we can come up with. I was like, hey, we need it. So, but seriously, really, I invite you to be in conversation and express your concerns directly to me. And let's move forward together and help do the vital work that we're here for. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over back to Melinda to field some questions and start this conversation.
Thanks, Rick. I'm going to look in the chat and to see if there are any questions, encouraging folks to give any responses or questions for clarification around some of the things that have been raised and any other points of conversation that would be helpful around it. There are some questions coming up about a succession plan prior to Simon's retirement and Rick's hiring. The question is, was there a succession plan prior to Simon's retirement and Rick's hiring, and what did it involve, if so? There's some other specific questions about staffers in the past that are coming up, and I'm wondering what you all want to share about that, if you're able.
I can talk a little bit about the hiring process if that's helpful. You know, the board is primarily tasked with, in a case of a transition, going out into the field, identifying the best candidates for the next person in line, in this case, the executive director, identifying a core group of candidates, and then, of course, finding the right person for the job. In this case, I don't want to get into too much detail about Simon leaving. That's obviously his narrative. But he had done such a tremendous job for the organization. He let us know that he was ready to start transitioning out, which gave us some time to start looking for a new director. We started a committee that was tasked with finding the right candidates. We've identified a few. I was not on that hiring committee, but from what I know about it, that candidate pool got whittled down to several candidates. There were lots of conversations with staff, several interviews. Each of the board members got to weigh in. There was a background check. And we felt after all of that that Rick was perfect for the job. And we extended an offer and he accepted. So I think in terms of a plan, yes, we had several months to figure out who we wanted to come into the organization. And as much as we possibly could, I think.
Great. There are some other questions that are coming up. I know that we have someone standing by in the room in person. So if there are folks who have questions in person, we can toggle between in person and in the chat. The question is around transparency. How can we get transparency instead of being kept in the dark because of, quote, legal issues? Anyone want to speak to matters of transparency?
Yeah, I mean, I can take this one. I think I'm the lawyer, so of course I'm being tasked with that, talking about legal issues. I think there's a distinction between things that we have not been able to talk about and continue to not be able to talk about, which is extremely frustrating for us because we want to be as open as possible. But when it comes to specific employee matters, it's actually, we're risking violating the law and violating the privacy of those individuals who were involved. So I can't get into specific employee matters, but in terms of transparency, we've tried to be as transparent as possible. I think we could do better in the future. Part of what we've been trying to do is, as a board, periodically just have a board post on the website. And I think the most recent one was from 3 or 4 weeks ago. And it's essentially a list of what's going on with the board, right? Among those things, who is termed off the board, who's joined, Michael Turner, Ina Fitchman, Maria Aggie Carter. We're so thrilled to have you on board. Some of the things that we've been doing, Grace and I took a course with the Board Chairs Academy, which is essentially, an education course for board members of nonprofit organizations. It's been incredibly helpful talking to other people in the field who are, facing the same kind of issues that we are. Talking about employment issues, talking about unionization. There's some information about our process there. So we are absolutely open to talking about new forms of transparency. I know that I'm not going to satisfy 100% of the people out there in terms of what we can talk about, but hopefully I can get close. And
and also, sorry, this is Grace again. One of the things about communication, these board columns are an attempt to actually, from our perspective, tell you what we're doing as a board. And a lot of it is probably not that interesting to you, but maybe some people are interested in, committee charters and stuff. But, that's something that we want to be transparent about. Like, this is what's happening in our board meeting. We're actually having our very first in-person board meeting this week, which I've never been to an in-person board meeting.
In 3 years.
The first one in 3 years. So a lot of this is happening kind of in and around COVID. And, there was a lot of communication, had challenges during COVID time. So, this is what we do. I mean, as the filmmaker, like, we communicate ideas and we're just trying to come up with the best way to do it. Just like Rick is offering office hours, we have, an email linked to the column on the website where you can get in touch with us if you have questions about, that's related to us. And we actually would love to hear from people because, like all of you, we're part of this community too. And we're also, trying to do better together. Like, the IDA is not just a few people. It's not just the staff or the ED or the board. It's everybody together.
And I know that, in one of the planning documents, there are some links to the columns that you all wrote. So I don't know if you want to drop them in. Okay, great, thanks.
So now the chat is lighting up a bit, and also I want to give some visual description, which I neglected to do. I am
Me
a
too.
Black African American woman, Black woman, brown skin, curly hair, glasses in this moment because I can't see that small. Sometimes I take it off, with a white shirt, and I'm coming to you from Muskogee Creek lands, also known as Atlanta, Georgia. There are a couple of questions that I think are more like a yes or no question, clarification just around whether or not there was a succession plan in place or not. That's a kind of a yes or no. Folks are asking for just a crisper conversation answer to that one.
A succession plan, yes, there was.
Okay. And then there was another question, since I think Grace asked talked about the board meetings. There was another question: are those open to like staff members? Are board meetings open? That's a question for
Um,
members, for staff and or IDA members to observe. Yeah, as a follow up on transparency.
Sure. I mean, first, I also forgot to do my visual description. I'm an Asian American woman with several shades of gray in my hair, wearing a blue shirt with blue and white striped shirt dress. In terms of board meetings, they are for the board that we need to get a lot of business done, but we often have staff members coming in, leadership team, staff members to sort of help us. I mean, this is the new incarnation. This is the board that we have become co-chairs of, the meetings that we're running starting as of March. And there's opportunities for staff to come in and sort of update us about what's going on. We don't work full-time at the IDA. I just want to make that clear to everybody. Everybody on the board is a volunteer. We all have full-time jobs. We are donating our time to, participate in the IDA because we believe in the mission. And, we are not like running full-time we're not controlling the IDA in any way. I feel like there's some misunderstandings about what a nonprofit board does. And in full transparency, like this has also been a learning curve for me personally, because, I'm trying to understand it as well. But this is why we took the Board Chairs Academy course. Chris, I think, was more experienced, but I think that this was something that, we need to get sort of like our ducks in a row so that we can actually function, like that the board can do the kind of governance that it's supposed to do. So
Great. There's some other questions that I just wanted to get in before we go to the folks in the room. There's a question around the law firm that was hired. Marjan Safinia asks, can you explain why IDA hired an anti-union law firm, Seyfarth Shaw, before public outcry caused reversal of the position? So some question around the law firm that was
Right.
hired.
Yeah, I can handle that question. That's actually something I wanted to address. We did have Seyfarth Shaw as counsel, but it was absolutely not for this union negotiation. What happened was Seyfarth Shaw, by the way, just to clear the record, Holger Besch is an attorney that we worked with at Seyfarth Shaw. I think he's a fabulous attorney. I think he's one of the nicest people I've ever met. And so I don't want this to turn into necessarily, Seyfarth Shaw is the worst thing in the world. But I do want to make it clear that when we received the notice from certain employees that they wanted to unionize, we acted as quickly as possible. We were given either 24 hours or 48 hours to respond to say that we accept their efforts to unionize. And because this is the only person that we had at the moment, we went to them for counsel. But before that response, we had already started getting into motion on who we were going to hire to essentially figure this out, right? To be completely transparent, when I got the email from the staff, I was overjoyed because, so many of us are very close to unions. Some of us are union members. If you know Rick's filmmaking work, he's obviously talked a lot about union, very union friendly. And we thought that, just from a practical perspective, to help rebuild this relationship between staff, the executive director, and the board, to be able to have essentially a platform to do that was a godsend. And the problem was that it has implications just to say, we accept, your unionization efforts. So we had to consult with Labor Council. We must have interviewed 8 to 10 lawyers to find the right person. We have ended up hiring Kathy Krieger, who's been fantastic. And, I want to take a step back and talk about accountability, because, in preparing for this, I've really thought a lot about that word and what it means. All right. And I think in my daily life, right, who am I accountable to? I'm a husband. I have 2 little kids. We know families that I'm accountable to my wife. I'm accountable to my 2 kids. I'm a lawyer at a law firm. I'm accountable to my clients. But what does it mean for a board member? What does it mean for Rick, the executive director, to be, who are we accountable to? And we always have to go back to the organization and the mission, right? So in handling an issue like the efforts to unionize, while my instinct is to go back and say, absolutely, let's do it. Let's accept it. I have to think about the fact that this is a 40-year organization, and it's helped over the course of 40 years, documentary filmmakers in all the ways that we know it has. And I'm tasked with making sure that it's going to thrive for another 40 years. I am a caretaker for this organization. So when I get an inquiry like that, we have to go to the board. We have to think critically about what the next step is, even if our instinct is, great, let's do it, which ended up being.
We did that.
Right? We did that. So we have to go through a process. And I know that it's sometimes frustrating and sometimes boring, but I just wanted to kind of walk you through that rationale. I don't know if you have anything to add.
I'd like to
No,
get
I
in with a different question when we can. Rick, I saw your hand up. This one is kind of for you, so you can use it as a segue to say what you're going to say.
Okay.
But there are a couple of questions around Pia, Malbron, and Doug and Molly had a question around, particularly around the reason for 18 to 23 people, kind of a trend of folks resigning and leaving in the last year. Like if you have a sense of why, or why you think, this has been happening or has happened.
That's a good question. And Chris, you can chime in, because part of this obviously has to do with personnel issues. There was an initial set of 4 staff who resigned, and I think you can, maybe Chris, want to elaborate around the details around that. I guess ultimately, I can't guess and speak for those staff, right? Really, I don't want to. I want to acknowledge their feelings and their hurt, and whatever reasons they decided to leave. They all left voluntarily. No one was terminated. But ultimately, I cannot speak for them. I want to learn from them. So yeah, I think we really have to hear from them. They left. Most of them provided resignation letters. I don't think it's appropriate from a personnel perspective to disclose what's in those resignation letters. But clearly, that's why we're here today. We're not sweeping this turmoil under the rug and these struggles. It would be very easy for us to act like nothing has happened. And I know there's some people who are heads of nonprofits out there who may have had staff resigned. If you could imagine, is it appropriate to speculate why they resigned? Is it appropriate to divulge what they may have sent in resignation letters?
Yeah, just in the chat, folks are more asking, like, if you have any reflections, on your own, or any theories,
Clearly.
or any, yeah.
theories I'm not gonna think. This is the first time I'm an ED. I have a lot to learn, and I came to this job during COVID. I have a colleague. We have 15 new employees and an entirely new leadership today who came here and joined the organization, fully embraced and having done their research. And I had one colleague and said, you know, Rick, you have a loud voice, and your passion could be misinterpreted. And I thought, wow, that probably could be amplified in the virtual space. I would say I spent very little in-person time with the vast majority of IDA staff prior to the new leadership coming in. We met virtually. We had meetings virtually. We never connected in person. I would say of all the staff that was here when I came into the position, the most I spent with any one individual staffer, I would estimate 20 to 30 hours in person in the first 9 months I was here. So I could imagine that my passion, my loud voice, the virtual, interaction may contribute to people not connecting with me in the way that I can connect with people here in this audience today. My reflections are clearly I have to be more mindful of how people read me. I have to be more mindful of listening. And I admitted before that one of the symptoms I have from ADD is that I can interrupt people, and that could be misinterpreted. I have to work to be quiet and fully listen and let people finish their thoughts and sentences intentionally and actually be present so that it's not misinterpreted, but also so that I can listen and learn and empathize. I think those are some of my reflections on how staff, may have misinterpreted who I am as a person.
In the room?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Rick. We're going to go down, and Keisha's going to help us with the in-person questions.
Hi, my name is Emily Abby-Cares. Question for Rick and then question for the board members. Rick, I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you're planning to do for current staff members. Are there raises or additional compensation at all for the additional labor that they've taken on? And two, to the board, I know IDA has been holding a series of virtual conversations over the last few months. I'd love to hear some of your findings from those conversations and some of the plans moving forward from those. Thank you.
So thanks for bringing the point about the additional labor. We have, so currently we are fully staffed, and we are fully staffed so that all the tasks are manageable. And when staffers had to take on additional responsibilities when their colleagues left, we did provide them with compensation. We actually have, in the process of doing a survey across the nonprofit sector, and we're very proud of what we pay our IDA staffers. We also pay all of their healthcare. They pay zero healthcare costs, zero premiums. They accrue 15 paid vacation days during the week. Our employees, many of them are hourly. So if they go into overtime, they're paid overtime. So we are very mindful of our compensation. And like I said, we want to treat them respectfully. We cannot do this work. This conference that is happening now would not happen without the labor of not only current Getting Real employees and staff, but generations of them. So we're, like I said, we're in the process of reviewing that. Some of this will ultimately be decided in a union contract. And so that's going to take a process. So we can't just single-handedly say, this is what you're going to be paid. These are the conditions, because that's all in the union negotiation.
Emily, thanks for the question. You had a question about community conversations. What was the result of those? How did we learn from it? I think the biggest thing that I learned from those sessions is I knew that people cared about this organization, but I didn't know. It really hit me how much people cared. There was, I won't lie, they were extremely difficult conversations to have. And I think a lot of people appreciated the forum, and I think a lot of people were critical of it. I think they said, well, we didn't really get as much out of it as we had hoped. I think going forward, we would love to have more of them. And I think one of the things that we're really interested in people telling us is, what do you think the appropriate forum is? I've had lots of conversations with individual members of IDA, different stakeholders in the community about, what's been happening and how to make things better, how to make better working conditions for the staff. It's been a little bit more challenging to come up with a forum that I think people really value and see as something that is useful for them. I think if anybody here was on those, you could probably attest to the fact that they were very emotional. There was, a certain freshness to what was going on. So it was difficult to process everything. I found it to be incredibly valuable in terms of just hearing everybody's perspective and understanding what the spectrum of feelings was on this particular, organization, where it was at. We're not going to solve everything. And that was, I think, one of the most difficult parts of those community conversations was they were not oriented to problem solve. Specifically, they were more oriented for people to come forward and feel comfortable airing their concerns, because we knew that problem solving wasn't necessarily, that wasn't the forum to do it with that many people involved. But absolutely, I think we had planned to do more. We got bogged down with the business of the organization in terms of on the board side, making sure that we were able to onboard new members, reformulating the different committees, making sure that we had a working functioning board. And I think we're now at the stage that we can start re-engaging in those conversations.
And I think, sorry, this is Grace. I think there's a question earlier about people joining in to board meetings, but one of the ways that, in addition to Rick having office hours or you being able to communicate to us, I mean, you're all seeing us here. Hopefully, if you have questions in the in-person day tomorrow, just come up to us and talk to us. We're easy to find. The other thing is, we have various committees, which we invite, we would love to have community members on these committees as we're trying to reboot them, because we value a diversity of perspectives so that we can understand what are the needs for advocacy, what are the needs, people are interested in finance. I mean, we're looking for people to be on the finance committee. It's not my forte. So, I think we have an openness. We would love for more people to just let us know. We said this in our column. Please get in touch with us if you would like to participate. We're really kind of rebuilding how we do this. So
yeah, and the audit committee, if anybody
yes.
Well, what's that email address where they can write directly to you and volunteer for a committee? And that's how you can become
Yes.
part of the.
I don't want to get it wrong. I think it's idaboard@documentary.org. Okay,
So look for
Zach
it.
will put it in the
Zach
chat.
will drop it in for the chat. But that's a perfect
Yeah,
opportunity.
audit committee, we need people, finance committee. And I think it's a way to actually see how the IDA board functions from the inside, because I actually wish I had had that experience before I was just came onto the board, because then you could understand how boring it is sometimes, but also how valuable it is to see an organization from the inside and how it works.
I don't know if we covered this. Going back to the question about whether staff are involved with board meetings, I can give you an example of how that works. we start the board meeting, we have certain, regular business that we need to take care of. And typically at the top of a board meeting, you would have, one of the directors of the staff come make a presentation. In particular, if it's something that's, coming up, one might be a presentation of the budget that needs to be approved by the board. So we go page by page through the budget. We have a development plan in place. So Brian Davis, I think, was at the last board meeting and made a great presentation on, our new development plan. So there is staff participation. I think we want to maximize that. And I think, honestly, for me, when I see staff coming in, it's not only an opportunity for me to meet that person and understand where they're coming from and have a real relationship with them. It's very inspiring. The last year and a half of being on this board has been really hard. And it's been hard for everybody involved. And sometimes you just need a moment of inspiration. And, we need to remember why we're doing this. And when somebody on staff has put in the hard work of putting, a presentation together, you see, okay, things are happening. We're going to raise all this financing, or we're going to approve this budget. It's my favorite part of the job.
It's actually a great reminder to us who only meet quarterly, or we've met more this year. What is the mission? When the staff actually tell us, these are the programs that we have coming up, it is, like Chris says, it's inspiring to hear that. It's a reminder.
Is there another question from the floor?
Yeah, we have one more question from the floor. We acknowledge that we're at time, but we're going to go over until 3, and we're going to have a hard stop at 3. So we have one more question here, maybe one more from the chat.
Yeah, so my name's Bridget, and I'm the director of the Documentary Association of Europe. And I think, like, maybe what I can say is what it sounds like from the outside as a non-IDA member, but as somebody who now has experience with member-driven organizations or associations like yours, that you have like these 3 kind of organs of the association. The first one being your members, for whom one would assume everything is kind of being generated and done. The second is the board, and then you have the staff. And so I'm just wondering, like, who is in charge of like setting the vision and kind of making the decisions about where you're going in the future, and how you reconcile those 3 organs so that you're on the same page? Is like some kind of plan in place for that for the next year? And could you maybe describe that?
Sure. So the goal always, when I came in, was to lead the organization and the board through a strategic planning process. And that is still the goal. Now, I certainly, through my 20 years of experience as a filmmaker and as a funder, had assessed like what we saw as some challenges, particularly in American documentary. Now, that plan was put on hold because of the struggles that we put, but that is still the goal. And that's why I've been fortunate enough to rebuild the team. We have 15 new staffers. We have 6 new directors who are all in place to help and inform and collectively collaborate on a plan that we can present to our members and to the board. But we spent the last 9 months really trying to just ensure the immediate stability of the organization. And so now that we have that in place, we can now begin on the process of creating a vision and a plan to achieve that vision with you all. That getting real is part of that process. Everything that's going to emerge from the concerns of these sessions will be part of that. The distribution advocates who yesterday presented their findings on the challenges around distribution. There was a panel on public media. All of these help inform that vision. So in that way, you all here are part of that process. It takes a while to really harness that, collect it, and put it into a strategic plan that's fundable, right? That ensures that. But the reality is the last 9 months have been about stabilizing the organization and staffing us so that we can continue to do the work.
I have a
And Rick,
couple of, oh, sorry. Sorry,
sorry,
just,
is it all right if I go ahead?
you
Or-
go, you got it. You
Okay,
got
just
it.
to add to that, in terms of, Rick has always presented to the board a very clear vision of what he wants for the organization, what he sees as the future. And what I see the board's role as is, number one, identify, going back to the selection process, again, he was clear about what he saw for the organization. That was perhaps one of the top things that we considered. And he's continued to make a very clear vision. And we talked about it just maybe a month ago when we were talking about, okay, what are the goals for the next year, right? And it's not the only thing we talk about. Obviously, with everything going on, we're talking about filling roles, organizational stability, things that we need to keep the programs running. But vision, if you don't have the vision, then there's really no reason to be doing this, because we're directionless. So I see the board's role in this is essentially looking to Rick and the rest of the staff to essentially build and express a vision for the near and the long-term future of the organization, and to ensure that the organization has all the tools necessary to implement that. And that's why we look at budgets. That's why we look at the development plan. We're here to support the leader and the organization and the staff.
I just want to go back to the chat a little bit. There are a couple of comments directly in response to Rick's sharing. Thank you for your transparency and reflections moving forward. I appreciate your amplifying the traits that you each plan to embody moving forward. So maybe that's something that we can end on. Wade Gardner wanted to publicly share that about 2 months ago, out of the blue, they reached out to Rick after reading a heartfelt post on LinkedIn. He replied back ASAP. We arranged a meeting, and after more than 20 years, joined as a member. I mention it because I appreciate the honest communication on this and wanted to say thanks for this conversation. There was another question just around how board members are chosen. Are they chosen from the membership? What's that process like as well? If anyone wants to quickly give the headlines around that.
Sure. So there's several committees on any nonprofit board, and several committees that you by law have to have. One of them is a governance committee, which I think we have 4 or 5 of the board members who are currently on that committee. Among other things, that committee is tasked with recruiting new board members. And traditionally what we do is we create a matrix of the existing board members and identify, okay, we have people who fill this need, we have people who fill this need, but we're short in this area. Who do we need that can reflect the membership, but who do we need who can also, do the work of the organization? So that's a constant conversation that we're having as a committee, is to identify people in the field. And really what happens is that committee gets together and says, hey, my friend Chris, who works at this company, has this experience. He's comes from this field. He has this depth of understanding. He is passionate about documentary films, and he would be a great candidate. So that person is identified. Somebody reaches out to that person and says, we're having these conversations. Are you interested? And eventually, enough board members.
Well, they're also given what are the expectations and responsibilities of the board. You're not just doing this because it looks good on your resume. I mean, it's work. You are responsible for for this organization's health.
Right. Yeah. And we've tried to become better about it, making sure that people coming onto the board understand that. So it is a constant process. We are always looking for new board members because, I think there's been a lot of talk about succession plan. We have to be thinking about that all the time. And we have a lot of great people, but we want to become even more diverse. I think we want to get people that maybe are
More
just
international.
more international, people who are not necessarily directly in the doc industry, but maybe adjacent to it, people that have financing experience, in addition to independent filmmakers who are the lifeblood of this organization. So it's, to me, that's like one of the most fun parts, is recruiting people into the organization and letting them know that we think they're amazing and that we want them to join.
Volunteer on a committee. You do not have to be a board member to serve on a board committee. So that's, if someone genuinely is interested, that is the way to come into the board pipeline. And the board has legal responsibilities. We're incorporated here in California, so there's also a whole complicated sort of set of legal responsibilities they have to sign on to, but that's the entry point. And if somebody's interested in being on the board, go to the email that address and say, I want to be on a committee, and we can
Just
start
real
the
quick,
process to find.
real quick, what are some of those committees? Like, just rattle
Okay,
off
so
a
there
couple.
is there's the Advocacy Committee, which will help us determine what are the priorities for advocating for independent documentary filmmakers. There is the Development Committee. They help figure out where are we going to raise the money to do this actual work. There is the Finance Committee to ensure the fiscal responsibility and that we are ensuring the legal, all the legal requirements that are required for a nonprofit are met. There's the Audit Committee, which is, another legal requirement related to fiscal responsibility. There is governance, making sure we are following the law and that we are doing everything that will ensure we keep our nonprofit status. So that's audit, finance, advocacy, governance. What else?
Executive.
The executive committee, which are the co-presidents, the secretary, and the treasurer.
Great. And as we are coming to a close with 2 minutes out, there is a question or two about just kind of going forward based on the rocky recent past, and the present that is, active in terms of working on these issues of communication and accountability. If each of you might just say, like, what is one thing that you are looking to exhibit yourself, and or something that you want to make sure continues to happen to bring IDA into its best future internally and its work in the world? Just like one thing that's forward looking that you can commit to and might even hold yourself accountable to around how you'll show up in your roles for the benefit of the organization.
I mean, off the top of my head, I live really close to the IDA office, and I actually, seeing the staff here and being in person with them is actually really inspiring. So I've already been to a couple of staff meetings in person. I really enjoy it. And I think that that might be a direct way to stay in touch with, staff concerns and understand what's going on in the office. Because as Rick said, in COVID, it's so hard to understand, like, what are the concerns, because we're all stuck in our boxes. But actually coming here and talking to Brian, the development director, talking to Keisha, director of funds, talking to Abby, director of programs, I get a better sense of like what the organization needs. So I'm committing to do that. I'm already doing it.
Yeah, I think it's very close to what I wanted to say. I think, looking at the board, maybe a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, I've always felt like our relationship with the staff could be much better, and I think we still have a long way to go. Just coming here and meeting some people that I've been on a million Zooms with has been valuable. I want to be there for those people as someone who, if they have a question about what the board is doing, someone who can support them. I don't want this to be, we're the board and staff, and there's absolutely no crossing over. This relationship should and will be much stronger. So I'm committing to that.
Well, it ends on me. I said this in one of our community conversations that in one of readings that I do for my personal growth, I read something to the effect that your greatest enemy could be your best teacher, and the in this case, I would say this challenge, this disruption, which is so painful for me to even be remotely a part of, that's been, I think, my best teacher in the following way. In terms of exhibiting traits or whatever, and I don't want this to sound too corny because I think it's so relevant to our work as documentary filmmakers. It's how can I lead with love and kindness and compassion in all facets of the work, in relating to the staff, in relating to our constituents, the filmmakers, in relating to the people in their films. That's really my goal now. I mean, and that's should be all our goals, but that's my focus. And I hope to, I'm committed to living up to that.
Thank you all here in the panel. Accountability and communication. Thanks for your engagement, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.